You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 43.
Subscribe to us and leave us a review in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and more using your favorite podcast app.
Visit us at codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussions, and more. Send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net. And come join the community of slackers over at www.codingblocks.net/slack. Follow us on Twitter at codingblocks or head to www.codingblocks.net and find all our social links there at the top of the page. With that, I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm Joe Zach.
And I'm Michael Outlaw.
Do we have any news?
Yeah, we have lots of news. Sorry, guys, we dropped the ball.
We still got to get used to this new format.
Yep, we're switching some things up, but thanks for sticking with us.
Yes. So, what's the news?
We have the latest reviews that are in. Do we want to talk about that? How about that for news?
We should do that.
I think. Whose turn is it to read these names?
I think
I'm scared that it's mine.
Is it yours? It might be yours. Go ahead.
Oh man.
Yep.
Okay. Well then, I guess here we go. Dark Jedi Overlord. Gustav. David W. Oh man.
Zhao Hong.
Okay, I like that one. Neo Anomaly. I am a resource. Alan W707. G Dog. And if I had to guess, Demara? Okay. I could take that. I'll let one of you guys take that. You know that like reading names is like my kryptonite. If your name isn't like John or Michael, then I'm going to butcher it. We know this by now.
All right, Joe, you got this next round?
Okay, we got Night Fallen, B May 1, J Cook 1017, Xiao Hong 89, Thalius, Ada Al Harami, Bree C 34, and I Powan 85. And we really appreciate it, guys. That's pretty much our only way of finding new listeners. Like that's our SEO. That's our only way of showing up higher in the searches. So we really appreciate those reviews. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, totally. And Zhao, thank you for doing that in both spots. That's amazing that you did it in both iTunes and Stitcher. So much appreciated.
I don't like how easily Joe blew through that list, though. He made it look so easy.
Man, he was studying that while you were struggling with the first one.
He probably was. Either that or I got the hard list and he got the easy one. I don't know.
Oh, by the way, I did have a favorite of those. I got to say, who was it on Stitcher that said that he got all giddy when a new episode came out?
Oh, I don't know what the giddy part. I thought you were talking about the I am a resource review.
No, so hold on.
Because the thing I liked about I am a resource is he was talking about how our honest opinions, because we don't have guests, we just give honest opinions, and there's a tremendous feature, not a bug.
Yeah, he did say, my wife would be the best to review this podcast, and she's the one who sees how giddy I am every time a new episode comes out.
Okay, so he was giddy.
Yeah, that made me smile. It made me kind of giddy myself. So,
although I was kind of questioning when I saw Alan W707, I'm like, wait a minute, Alan, did you write in? Did you change the spelling of your name and write in one?
I might have various accounts all over.
Because it started out really suspect because it starts out as this is the best coding podcast ever, and I'm like, okay, I agree.
And that Alan dude is awesome.
Yeah,
yeah, it was really. I'm not convinced yet.
But yeah,
it's suspect. But speaking of feedback, actually, we really got some great feedback and a lot of it for the last episode, particularly about my butchering of the command pattern. So if you go to the website, codingblocks.net/episode 42, you can just look at the comments there on that actual post, and you'll see a lot of really good information, people sharing really good examples compared to my not so great examples, and just a lot of information going on in there. And so you should definitely check that out if you are interested in design patterns. And we also got a really great email from Wesley Backer, and he sent us some examples of the command mediator and a few other patterns that are related to what we talked about. So we'll have some links to that on the show notes for this episode, which is /episode 43. And he actually sent us a video as well, and I haven't heard back from him, but I'm hoping that he's going to put that up somewhere that we can share, because it's really great information, and it's really thoughtful and nice. So thank you, Wesley.
I still want to argue the point that the mediator wasn't the puppet master that...
That put you guys to sleep?
No, not at all. Can you hear us?
Nope.
You can hear us now.
I can now.
Man.
So thanks for putting up with us again, guys. We're switching some formats. We're putting some things together and try and make this easier so we can put out more episodes. But there's some rough spots, so we're working on it.
Yep.
Yeah, I still want to go back to that mediator though and blame Alan, or not blame Alan, but argue the point that the mediator pattern wasn't the puppet master.
Oh, it didn't sound like it. Like, I mean, afterwards, I need to go back and read that one myself too.
So did it make sense what I was trying to say then about it not being a puppet? Because all it was to like facilitate the communication without
knew
them
what
knowing.
to talk to without blasting it out to everybody. Basically, is what it
The
sounded
mediator was the one we got the least feedback about.
No, repository. Did we get much back on that one?
That was a distant second.
Interesting.
I was definitely the one who got the most feedback last episode, so I guess that means I won.
Well, I guess I was saving my feedback for the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, I'm wearing the dunce cap this episode.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, we're all developers. We're all fairly honest guys. So, you know, we'll take the lumps as they come. So, yeah. Again, we do appreciate the feedback, though. I mean, we're not, you know, we're not the end all be all on everything here. So
are you saying that last episode's audio had a bug? That the content wasn't right? Or like, what are you saying?
A bug went out in the audio.
It's not a bug, it's a defect. Big difference.
Oh, okay.
That's
okay.
awesome. All right. So what?
Speaking of awesome,
yeah,
I am going to a board game convention next week, Dice Tower Con, for anyone who's in Florida or maybe going there. But I wanted to mention it just because I thought that board games, at least the nerdy, especially European board games, are kind of a funny programmer interest. Like I know a lot of dev-minded people that really enjoy board games. And I think it's kind of funny because they usually are some sort of really arbitrary, complex system that you manipulate. And it does kind of remind me a little bit of programming. And so I think it's kind of funny that, a funny coincidence that a lot of programmers do seem like board games. And I was wondering if that was just me wishfully thinking that, or if that's actually true. Like, do you guys like board games?
Oh, dude, man, me and my wife, we play board games all the time. Like, we have a fairly vast collection of them.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a blast.
So what kind of board games are you talking about here then? Because, I mean, this is, a show for developers. So what kind of board games are we talking about?
So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely not Monopoly. That's everyone's favorite, game to look down upon in the BGG community. But, Carcassonne,
Did you just say
Settlers of Catan.
BGG?
Yeah, man. Board Game Geek.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just found that kind of humorous. Okay.
Those are my people.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Well, because, I feel like if we're going to talk about board games on this show, then you'd have to talk about a game like Sea Jump. Have you guys heard of that?
Never heard of it.
No.
All right, so head over to www.c-jump.com. And this is a computer programming board game. Right? This is a great way to get kids started on programming if you want to introduce some concepts to them.
Very cool.
I haven't played it myself, so I can only say that it's a great resource for them based off of things that I've heard others say, but it's pretty cool because if you read the board, like it's literally the control flow there on the board, If your current dice number is, greater than 3, go here, else you go there. If the number is this, you switch it on the case statement.
I was going to say, what's it like? Roll the dice, figure out why that didn't work, figure out why that didn't work, roll the dice, figure out why that didn't work.
No, it's you roll the dice and then you're being told to roll 3 more dice, but you only have 1 dice to roll. And you're like, I'm out of resources. And they're like, doesn't matter. You got to roll 6 dice because the dice have to get rolled. This has to get done.
The games I'm talking about, the rule book is thick and there are often multicolored cubes.
Multicolored cubes.
So
okay.
I haven't done
many.
Meeples. Yeah, I haven't done many of those like with dice, but like Pandemic, that's a whole lot of fun. We got that. 7 Wonders, that's a fairly complex
that's one of my
game.
favorites.
That's a lot of fun. I'm trying to think. Like we kind of went on a binge recently to where we just started buying some because they really are, and they stretch your brain too, right? Like you seriously have to think, and there's a lot of strategy. I can't think of any of the other ones right now.
Well, I was thinking like a classic like Risk.
Risk is fun. I almost
for the first hour or two.
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? Like that game drags on forever. It's like Monopoly.
Okay, so then you lose. That's why it's not.
No,
That's why.
it just nobody ever
I know,
wins.
I get it. No, hey, it's fine. Hey, Alan, look at me for a minute. Blink if you lose. Oh, never mind. I get it. I got it. I'm with you. No, it would be horrible.
That's
then.
like Monopoly. It's like the never-ending game. Basically, people will just start doing stupid things to make it end.
So
Right?
you lose at that one too. Blink. Oh yeah, no,
Yes,
I got it. I got it.
exactly.
Yeah, I guess that would be boring too.
But yeah, dude, totally. We're into the board games. We love them, and if there was a convention around here, we would probably be some of the people going to it.
Well, nowadays it's all about the video games, though. There's no time for board games.
I don't have time for video games.
It's high noon.
Man,
So
Michael just hit the floor.
I did.
you've been playing a little bit, huh, Joe?
Yes, I love it. It's a great game. I've been really happy. You know what it is I was thinking about this. Work's been really crazy lately. It's been really busy, and so when I'm not working, I don't want to do anything that isn't fun. So I have been playing the heck out of some video games lately, and so if I'm not working, I'm still sitting in the same spot, but either playing Overwatch or one of the games that I just bought in the Steam sale.
But wait, don't you now have 2 bionic wrists? Like, you can't do that. You can't do that.
This is why
have-
he can.
You have 2 bionic wrists now. You can't play
We
games.
can rebuild him.
Yeah.
We can make him better.
I mean, I built this big rig so that I can kind of keep my arms all floating up in the air, look like a spider.
All right, so wait a minute. What's your favorite Overwatch hero to play as?
Lucio.
Oh,
and
really?
Symmetra. Yep.
Okay, so you like the support guy then the best.
Yeah, I can't aim, and I like Winston a lot too. So yeah, anyone where I don't really have to aim, and I just have to like stay alive. And
Now,
that's-
have you
that's
been
what I
checking
like.
out have you been checking out masteroverwatch.com?
No.
So they have stats on like which heroes are, having the best streaks in terms of like kill death ratios, popularity, win rates, score per minute, things like that. And some of them you're like, okay, I guess I saw that one coming. But one, and I cannot remember how to say this guy's name. I don't. Why am I trying to say another name? Torbjorn.
Oh yeah. Torbjorn.
Yeah. Molten Core. Yeah, that guy. He's like one of the top kill death ratio guys right now, but he's actually about to get nerfed on the consoles.
Oh.
So
Yeah. Maybe
Alan
one of
is-
these days I'll see the game. I haven't even seen it yet.
there's a lot of fun characters on there though, but I think that's like part of the challenge is trying to play as like not getting stuck in a rut and playing as the same character, trying other characters.
Okay, but here's the real question. How does it rank in terms of some of the best Call of Duty games you've ever played?
Better.
Is it better, really?
It's so much more fun, and the pacing's great. There's not any sitting around. There's not a lot of frustration. I feel like whenever I die, I deserved it.
So
Interesting.
here's an interesting contrast I'm going to get, because it is a lot of fun, and I'm not going to take away from that. Is it better than a Call of Duty or a Halo or a Battlefield? I don't know. It's a lot of fun, but my son, he made a great point about it that I couldn't really argue against him with, and that's that he said he theorized that the game would lose popularity rather quickly compared to other games like a Halo or a Call of Duty, because you don't have to earn anything. You just start the game and you have everything you want.
Oh, there's no level up system.
There's nothing like you do level up, but it's really pointless. You gain nothing from it. You get nothing from it. And if you do get like Joe mentioned, he was looking at the skins that he had for his characters. Like, if you get any of those skins, it's like, okay, who cares? Like, really, it changes nothing about the way your character plays.
Your hand looks a little different.
Every character is going to play the same and have the same abilities as the day you first start playing the game. Unlike a Call of Duty, for example, where you have to level up to get to certain guns.
It feels rewarding to a certain degree.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. Well, one of these days.
That's pro and a con, though.
Yeah, I
It's both.
agree.
It
It
is.
makes it to where everybody can have fun right off the bat.
But I
right?
thought it was an interesting theory, though, for a youngster to come up with.
Yeah, that might be. Well, one of these days
Yeah.
I'll play it and we'll see how it goes.
All right. Well, if you do, you should hop into our Pound Gaming channel and find some people to play with.
Hey, wait, you also listed here that there's an Overwatch Steam sale. So you're playing on PC?
Unrelated.
Oh, okay.
I am on PC, but Overwatch is Blizzard. Steam sale is different. I have almost every Steam game now, so it's not as exciting. But I did round out my collection of roguelikes, so I got a couple ones I've been having my eye on.
They could just sit there and collect dust in your digital library.
It's embarrassing.
Hey, what percentage of games do you buy versus play? Or play versus
I could probably
buy?
figure that out. It'd be really embarrassing, though. There's so many games where like I go to buy it and I already have it. I'm like, oh, and then there's so many games that I have, and I'm like, what the heck is that?
I think you have an addiction there, Joe.
Yeah.
You have a problem. Do you have the
stay away
same
from
problem with
Steam.
board games? Do you realize like, oh crap, I already had that version?
No, I don't have that problem. Probably because I can't use them by myself.
Yeah, the interesting thing though is these board games are as expensive as video games. A lot of them. Like they're not cheap. Yeah, we're not talking about Risk. Like if you go get Pandemic or some of these other ones out there, they're $40-$50.
So you're not talking about like a game that you would see at a big box store.
You're not going to see this at Walmart. Yeah, these are games that you find online. Like if you go to Amazon and you sort by like popular board games, you'll see some on there you've never heard of, and they'll have like 500 5-star reviews. Like they're fun, but they literally, if you don't go watch a YouTube video on how to get started in the game, it'll take you an hour to read through the directions and figure out all the ways that you need to do things to play. Like they're not simple games. But at any rate, I think we've killed the game stuff.
What?
Yeah.
Never.
All right. So what do we got next?
Well, I think this episode we're just going to this is like more random thoughts, but not just my head this time.
These are collaborative random thoughts.
Yeah. At least that's what the voices in my head tell me.
Awesome. So I guess in this case, let's let Joe pick the first one because he said he had one he was going to surprise us with. I'm kind of curious what that one's going to be.
Oh, God.
Yes, and actually, this one was sent in to us by Steve, and I don't know if you want to say your last name or not, so I won't. But he wrote us about the age-old debate of using arbitrary dates in your database to represent either max or unknown dates. So the idea there is that instead of having a nullable column, you use a date like January 1st, 1900, or December 31st, 2525 to represent some sort of arbitrary rule in your system, and anywhere in your code and whatnot, to check for that specific date to mean, either unbounded or unlimited.
You know what? So here's my take on that, being that I love database stuff. I actually like having the value in there, and I'll tell you why. And it's got more to do with performance than anything else. If you choose to put a null in there for indicating that there was no start or end, right? Like let's say that you have a table that you say, hey, I want everything for this given time slice. If you typically would do a between there, now you've also got to do like an is null type thing around it. So now you have this scalar
I thought
operation.
That might be where you're going.
Yeah, you got to do this scalar operation on the column and every piece of data that it's scanning through in the table in order to do your between. And so there's actually a performance hit on that. Now, that comes contrary to the space hit that you take by putting a value in there. But I feel like if you're going for performance, it makes more sense to have that data in there with either a minimum value that you know about or a maximum value. That's my take.
What about you, Outlaw?
I mean, specifically for dates, I would like to say that I agree with Alan, but yet so often is the case where it's just null.
Right.
I mean, I hear you, man. Every January 1st, 1970 for everything.
Yep.
But
But you are, I mean, that's the point of null. It's to represent something that either doesn't matter or I don't know, right? And so we're kind of redefining that, but it really does make querying so much easier. And at a glance, I think it's really obvious, at least for a human, to tell that date is meaningless.
Yeah, maybe. I guess it would also depend too on like what the data is, because January 1st, 1970 might be a valid date.
That's true.
So maybe you need something a little bit more obscure.
Well, I mean, even if it is a valid date, that should be fine, right? Well,
No,
as long as there's
be.
nothing before it, is what I'm saying.
No, because then you'd never be able to differentiate what rows have that date because they mean it, and which ones have that because they don't mean it.
Right.
You just talked me out of it, because I would hate for one table to say use the 1900 trick, and for the next table to not be able to use that trick because that's a valid date. And so now I've got some tables that rule applies to, and some tables that don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for performance reasons, if that's what you're trying to do, then it makes sense to put it in there. If it has nothing to do with performance, then maybe leave it null, because it is. If it's not a real number, then it should have no data, right? Or not a real date.
I mean, it would also be weird though too. What if you had? Okay, I'm just making up something, so this is totally contrived. But what if you had some table structure, right? So some table schema, and the columns included a create date column, right? And maybe an updated date column, right? Well, if the row has never been updated, then why have a value there?
So
even if it was a dummy value, it still reads weird, because now you're saying the created date is today's date and the updated date is some date, many years ago.
So
right?
I totally agree with that. And so I'm going to modify my statement. So for created and modified dates,
I didn't mean to sway you, but it sounds like I'm doing a pretty good job. I should run for president. You know what? Outlaw for president, y'all. 2016, we're taking this thing over.
So I actually agree with you. If it's a created date, a modified date, then those should be real values. Those should always have values.
Okay.
Like real ones. If it's something like, I guess when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about something like active date, right? So let's say that you have lookup tables. Like, I'm not a fan of deleting data. If you have a lookup table, then let's say that in that lookup table you have, a type or a type name or something, right? I'm not a fan of, hey, if this lookup type is no longer valid, then just delete it or mark it as deleted, because then you have no history.
Oh, so you're saying like using a date as to whether or not something is active or not?
Right. So, you'll see a lot of times people will have
like here's
flags.
My order statuses, and these status only the order statuses that have, like, because let's say order status is your lookup table.
Yep.
Right. So the order is either processed, it's shipped,
yes,
it's pending,
yes,
packing, whatever.
Yep.
Okay. So then you would want to use the date of whether or not the status is active.
So no. So typically what you'll see in a lookup table is like an active flag, right?
All right, it's a bit, yeah.
A bit. And the problem with that is there's no history to it. You never have any clue, like, was this actually used back last year, or was this just...
Oh, so you want like a last used column or something?
A begin active and end active. So let's say that you have...
But that still seems like those would be like times where you'd want real dates.
So
not January 1st, 1970.
So the begin date, yes. The end date, you would want some arbitrary, or maybe not arbitrary, but some selected max date in the future.
Oh, okay.
Because you want this thing to stay active until you turn it off. When you turn it off, then you set that end date to whatever that time is that you want to turn it off. But then that also goes back to, like, if you have a lookup table like that, like, I'm not a fan of just re-enabling one that was already there. So let's say that you had an order processing thing and you had a status in your warehouse where it was on the floor, right? So that was active from January 1st last year till June 1st of last year. If you ever want to bring that thing back, you don't re-enable that record because you lose the history on it. You create another record that would then have its own start and end date, even though it's going to be the same name, right? It's going to be on the floor.
That'd be weird.
No, but the thing is, the beautiful part about that is when you go to query those statuses, you literally just say, hey, give me the status where it's active, where today's date is between the start date and the end date. And that's why having an end date that is 25/25 makes sense, because if you do a null in that end date.
I mean, I guess I see where you're talking about with a max date, because I was thinking of like a min date would be your default there. I still don't necessarily follow along with the order status example. Because I still don't understand why you wouldn't just re-enable the previous
history. You lose the history. So
yeah, but what does it matter? You're re-enabling it. Like, what if it was only disabled for a day? Who cares?
what if you want to know that, hey, we stopped using this thing for some reason last year, right?
Well, I feel like in this contrived example though, like if that were the case, there would be a better way to get that information. That like, hey, we've stopped using it. Like, you'd probably have some kind of like history kind of table to know, like, hey, we no longer use it. Like, you wouldn't use those two columns for that. So I think that's what's throwing my head off for this example.
Here's the problem with what you do if you re-enabled that. So let's say that this thing came into play at January 1st last year, and then you cut it off June 1st last year. Okay. Now, what do you do when you go to re-enable this thing? Do you say the start date is now whenever you turn it back on and the end date is out in the future? Or do you act like there was never a gap and you just leave the start date the same that it was and you extend the end date to some date in the future? So now you don't even know that there was a gap looking at the lookup. Like,
I mean, again, this is like where this example is falling apart because, like, I guess, like, well, one, you got a complicated story here, my friend.
No,
I don't understand why we care about the
flows.
statuses like this.
No, that happens all the time, right? Like, you change a workflow out in a warehouse and you might introduce a new step, right? Like,
you could introduce a new step, sure,
and
but
get rid
you're
of old
talking
steps
about
as well.
Yeah, but the way you're describing it though is like, I mean,
granted, you went with this arbitrary order status, but
you brought it up.
No, I said a type.
I'm going to rewind.
Yeah, you did the order status. But at any rate, so do you get what I'm saying though, Joe? Like, the reason why I would go with a start date and an end date and the end date's off into the future, because when you query to get the active statuses that are available, you just say we're dates between the start and the end, and that's it.
Yep.
Can we rewind? Did I really bring up the order status thing?
Joe, did he bring up the order status?
I'm losing my mind.
I don't know.
He did.
I was just looking at your faces and
he took.
they kept blending together.
No, yeah, okay, because you said a lookup table, and so I brought up order status as an example.
Yeah. So at any rate, that's the reason why. So I amend it. If you don't have to do anything that's like a between, I totally agree. But for created dates, modified dates, things that actually have a meaning.
But every time we use a date, though, it's generally because it means something. And that's where I have the problem with it. Like, I understand what you're saying with query. It definitely makes queries easier.
And faster. Not just easier.
And faster. I won't take that away. But you generally want the date to mean something.
Well, how about this? Have you ever had a bug that was caused by records not being returned because of a null value?
Oh, absolutely. And so that's where, and because where I was thinking, now this, you probably wouldn't do this on a date column, but I was thinking about joins specifically are annoying.
You got to do an is null or something.
Where you do have to do like an is null, and then if it is null, provide some, constant, as your seed, right? So that it can match on a null.
And that's a performance hit because
yes, and that's why I'm not saying it's not a performance hit.
Yeah, a big one in many cases.
But definitely. Well, let's say depending on the size of the data that you're trying to query, right?
But it's going to force typically a table scan over a seek. If we're talking SQL Server specifically, it can't index data that it doesn't know about because you're now trying to say if this, then that. Like, that's literally what an is null or a coalesce is going to do, right? So it's you are killing your query optimization when you have to do a join on that or a where on that or anything like that. So, yeah.
All right. So I guess we should blame Steve then for breaking up the band because we don't seem to agree on this. But
so here's where I'm at on it. I agree that arbitrary dates are faster and less error prone. And I still don't want to do it. So I'm of two minds. So how are we supposed to come to a consensus?
But why? Why don't you want to do it though?
Because that's what nulls for. It means I don't know. It's blank. There's no value. I mean, you wouldn't do that for an integer, right? You wouldn't say, -1, because we're never going to have negative values.
People do that all the time.
But okay. Now that is wrong.
But you know what?
Objectively, that is wrong.
So that brings up the next conversation that is completely off the cuff here. And this is because this correlates very directly to a conversation I had on Slack with Jason. And he was asking about the same type thing with an integer. And his was a weird situation. It was an access bug, really, that came out to be the issue. But he asked if you have an integer field, should you default to 0 other than putting a null in it, or should you have a null? And I was like, man, that's really not. It depends on the situation, right? Like if it.
I don't like
sometimes
that.
0 is a real value.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's the problem.
That's what I'm saying. Like this is the same exact thing
Yes.
as the dates.
Yes.
Is if 0 is supposed to be a valid value in your system, then you
could be forcing a meaning that shouldn't be there.
Because
a
null would be an unknown, whereas a 0 would be a known.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I told him in the situation to where, you know, maybe it's being used like sort of as a Boolean or something. I mean, that could be a problem.
I mean, if I ask Alan right now how much money is in Joe's bank, and Alan says, I don't know, that's very different than Alan coming back and saying $0. $0 are in Joe's account. Because then I'm going to be like,
or -1.
Hey, Joe, are you okay, man?
Yeah.
But see, and
no, send me some money.
I think that's really the problem, though, is everybody has different ways of doing things, right? Like some people will use that integer thing and put a -1 in there indicating all. Like, well, the example I gave him was permissions, right? Like a lot of times if you've implemented some sort of permission system in your data, right? A lot of times people will use null to say that you have everything, maybe 0 to say that you have nothing.
Wait, what kind of permissions are we talking about?
Just
I guess I'm thinking like the way permissions are done in like a Unix system.
Well, that's
where
that's
different.
No, that's bit
flags,
shifting and stuff. No, this is more like if you are going to, like, let's say that you have a table.
Is administrator.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, an admin. You might have a -1 saying that means everything. Some people will use a -1. Some people will use a null.
I guess here's my take on both of these, though. There is no one right answer.
Correct.
Like, it's going to depend on the situation based on, like, is 0 a valid value? Is January 1st, 1970 a valid? Are you joining on massive amounts of data where you need that little bit of extra performance that having a date value instead of a null is going to mean to you? Then maybe those are things that matter. But if you want null to mean an unknown, then that's your only option.
I'm in favor of not nulling the column and forcing a value.
Really?
I mean, like for a date, not a created
back and check your commits.
So like I said, a created date, a modified date, absolutely, those should have valid values in them.
I see some code reviews in your future.
A start and an end date. Totally, I'm all for not nulling those things, and
I'm gonna be like, "Hey, Alan, I see this new table schema. I don't see any defaults on this date column."
I'm gonna find somebody to approve that pull request before you see it.
Rubber stamp time.
You just gotta find that person that doesn't really look all that hard.
Yep, right here, baby. It depends on when you ask me. If you ask me for a pull request at 5:30, guess what?
Approved.
So I feel like we just spent 15 minutes talking about this, and the answer we have decided on is it depends.
Yes, totally.
Or I don't know. I think our answer is null.
We have a null answer here. That's awesome. This episode is sponsored by Infragistics. Enterprise Services, UX Focus, UX First. Infragistics' UX First focus does not end with mobility solutions, UX prototyping tools, or developer toolsets. Their UX services team can help drive success in your initiatives by examining your existing and future technology requirements to help you better understand how to modernize your enterprise. Infragistics can help with technology migrations, modernization, and mobilization efforts. They can even help build and drive a user experience focused culture in your organization by integrating UX into your process from the start. Also, Infragistics has a blog where they discuss a number of relevant topics that may help you in your development challenges. Head over to www.infragistics.com and get started with your free 30-day trial. All right, so for our next topic, this one comes up simply because I've had too many discussions about it here lately, and people are completely polarized on this topic. So, storing queries.
How many pixels to move the logo?
Right. So, where should your queries be? Should they be in Procs in your database, or should they be in your code? And let the fighting begin.
Can I vote neither? Can that be an option?
That's interesting. You don't like
No
data.
queries.
You don't like data.
Well,
Yeah,
got
we're
a
devs.
static
We don't
website.
write queries, right? You guys aren't writing queries. There are DBAs for that.
well, if you're using, depending on your tool set to get to the database,
Here it
it might
goes.
be making its queries on its own for you. And so that's completely abstracted away from you. You don't know how it's getting the data. You just trust that it is.
And you don't know how bad that query is that's getting it for you, is what he's saying.
That's where you might have to, poke around, do some inspection, like see how to write your code better to better optimize how you retrieve the data. But the point being is that maybe you aren't writing the queries yourself.
All right, so let's quit beating around the bush here. So Outlaw is voting for an ORM, basically, is what he's saying. And I'm sure
saying like if I had to even lower it to 2 letters, there's one that comes to mind. What was it? A, B, C, D, E, F. that entity framework that you wouldn't know the query that was being written.
Well,
Right?
GraphQL, man.
what'd you say?
You know what's funny? I got an email from Facebook Recruiter, and the email basically just said, "Hey, contact me at Facebook. We got GraphQL." So I responded back one word,
No.
3 letters,
He's a-
PHP. No, I didn't. I'm joking, and I actually don't hate on PHP as much as I hate on JavaScript.
oh man, that hurts. All right, so I am curious. So we know where Outlaw stands. He's definitely strongly in the ORM camp, and we'll say Entity Framework will be his horse.
I mean, in a .NET world, I'm definitely a fan of Entity Framework.
okay, Joe, your take.
Yeah, I advocate for Procs, but it's one of those it depends answers. In a normal business situation, it would probably I would probably be closer to doing something like Link to SQL or an Entity Framework. But if you are dealing with serious amounts of data and you're having query performance problems and stuff is getting hairy, then I love having my logic in Procs so I can ship them off to experts for help, and I can say, hey, look, here are the arguments in, here's the query output that I want. Do whatever nasty black magic weirdo stuff you have to do.
So in other
to
words,
make that happen.
you want to delegate your SQL writing.
Well, I'll write it first. It's just someone has to fix it.
I gotcha.
They need to do some CTEs with some temp tables and some unions instead of ORs and just other weirdo stuff that I don't have to deal with.
I'm sure there have been once or twice or 1,000 times where I've had my hand slapped by a DBA. Like, why would you do that? And I'm like, I thought it was the way to do it.
Okay, so here's the thing. Like, I used to be strongly on the proc side of the world, like probably for most of my career, because I've basically worked in SQL Server, and that's what you know, that's what you do. And for whatever reason, in the past year or so, like my whole brain has been going scalable. Like, how do you scale? And here's my problem with doing it in a proc. So let's say that you have just tons of data, and indexing no longer gets you where you need to be, right? So that thing that you handed off to the DBA, what's he going to do now? Well, he's going to be like, well, you know what? We've got 300 million records in this table, and we got 200 million records in this table, and the only way we can make this faster is we're going to have to create another table that's a flattened out version of that and index the heck out of it, and then that's how we're going to go about fixing this problem, right? And here's
Band-Aid.
It's a Band-Aid. And here's my problem with that particular solution, right? So if you look at SQL Server, it is an OLTP. It is an online, it's a transactional system, right? It's good at fast inputs, reads, writes, and that kind of stuff. When you start trying to do reporting out of a system like that, where you have hundreds of millions of records, that's not what it's built for. So here's my thing is I've started thinking about, okay, well, what about tools like Elasticsearch, right? The whole point of that entire piece of software is stupid fast querying, right? Like you tell it the types of results you want, and then you feed it data in that format, and it's really good at that. So if you build everything into Procs now, you don't really have the ability to pivot and use a technology like that. If you built it in your code to where you had something like a repository pattern, right? To where you call something and then you don't know what it uses behind the scene. Currently, it could use Entity Framework, right? And it could query SQL Server. Or maybe at some point you say, man, my database is really dying on these hundreds of millions of records that it's trying to join across 20 tables. we need to move this into a search index. Your repository is still the facing piece that you use. And now instead of querying SQL Server, whether it was a proc or code, now you're calling something like Elasticsearch. So that's where I kind of feel like having that sort of built into the code allows you to be able to pivot more.
I feel like, okay, because just to play devil's advocate with that for a moment, regardless of whether or not the query was in your C# code, for example, or your Java code, for example, versus it being in a Sprock, the repository pattern could still be abstracting away how the query is being called, whether it's calling a Sprock to query it or whether it's calling a select statement that's baked into it. Either way, that could be abstracted away.
Yeah.
And if you decide to bring in something like a Hadoop or Elasticsearch or whatever, then you have another repository implementation that could get called. So either way, you don't have to have the query itself in the code.
Okay, let's take one layer on top of that then, because I agree, that's absolutely correct. But typically when you put that stuff in a Sprock, don't you also bake your business logic into that Sprock?
Well, okay, so here's where I was coming at it. Here's where my point was on it, though, is that when it does get into specifically business logic in your Sprock, and I also want to say a special kind of business logic, because what if, and I can't really think of a good company example to describe here, but maybe if your company, like if that was your secret sauce, right? If the value that you were providing is whatever that Sprock is, right? Then you're just giving away your source when someone gets the database.
Yeah.
Whereas, yes, I know somebody can decompile your code, right? And, obfuscate it and things like that. Like, I realize that there's ways to do that, but you're making it a lot more work. I mean, it's kind of like the old saying about, locking the doors on like your car, for example, right? It's you're not keeping the person who really wants inside of that car is going to get inside of that car, but it's keeping honest people honest.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're just giving away the database with the stored procedure in it, then, some DBA is like, well, hey, I could make this thing better. I can make it do my own thing. Like, so if that's important to you and that is your secret sauce for the company, then that's where I kind of feel like, that's weird that you're going to just put it in the Sprock.
So, Joe, do you have any more input? Because I have one more example as to why you would put it in the code.
Is it about order statuses?
No.
Oh.
No.
I'm pretty sure I was right the first time.
So you just give it to the DBA and let them deal with it?
Yep, done.
So I'll give you an interesting one, and this actually came from Instagram. So if you haven't, you should check out their tech blog because they talk about all the challenges they had as they grew, right? Like, I mean, just any kind of MVP, any minimum viable product that you put out there, you start off a particular way. You probably just had it in MySQL and then it grew and it grew and it grew. And then you were like, oh God, it outgrew what it could do, right? They talk about what they did and it involved database sharding. But in order to do that, they had to do it at the application layer because generally speaking, what the sharding is you have data that falls within a particular range on server A, then you have another range on server B. And so sharding is basically putting data on different systems so they can all be super efficient at getting that data out, right? But the knowledge of where to get that data lied in their application layer. I believe that's correct. So if you put it in that layer, now the place that knows how to go get that data is in your application and it can do it. If you stick it, and here's the other part of it that I think is fairly important. If you think about things in terms of like a microservice and being able to scale, if you have that microservice, you can put it on 30 different servers, right? You no longer have a single point of failure. If you use a database server to say, okay, go query this link server or that link server, that is sort of your single point of failure. Sure, you could have a failover, but it's not as easy to spin up multiple database servers, nor is it cheap compared to, oh, well, let's just spin up another process on another, fairly lightweight box over here, and then you have microservices that can scale out. So to me, it's more about the scaling thing as to why you might want to put your stuff in code versus in a proc in the database?
But I feel like I blew away your whole theory for putting it in the code because the sprock, it could still be calling a sprock with the repository pattern.
No, I'm talking about the scaling. Now, if you call a sprock on the server, now how are you going to know, oh, well, that data is not on this server. I need to call out to this other server to get that data because I sharded that server off, right? That's on shard number 1 over here. So that's what I'm saying. If you have that in your application logic, you can scale out that application, that microservice, to put it on as many boxes as you need to.
Again, okay, so just playing devil's advocate here. In your repository pattern, let's harp on that one, since that was apparently one pattern we got right. Couldn't it have that logic of knowing, like, hey, you are asking for this query? Well, this query is going to go against, I'm going to make this call against this shard over here where I'm going to execute this sprock.
You could potentially do that. I mean, yes, to your point. Yes, you could spread the sprocs out amongst various different database servers, right? You totally could.
Because, I mean, if the core of the question, as I originally understood it, was, do you write your select statements do you bake that in with your C# or Java or C++, you bake that in, or do you abstract it away to where it's in a stored procedure? And then we didn't even talk about examples where maybe it's in like a config file, like an iBatis might use, right?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. But either which way, it's still kind of in your code. I guess the only question, though, is when you talk about doing that in the...
You understand? Like,
yeah.
I mean, that's where, like, your example was kind of... Yeah, I don't know. All right. I think we beat it up.
That's a tough one. I mean, yeah, I don't know. There's arguments for them both, obviously, but...
So just to kind of sum it up, we're basically saying if by doing it in the code, you buy yourself some flexibility. Doing it in the database, it's a little bit easier to delegate and look at those things in isolation. And so once again, I guess the answer is it depends.
Yeah, but I still feel like the one last thing I do want to touch on that I kind of missed, though, is if you put all your logic, like your business logic, in your proc, you can no longer act on that in your application. Well, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you did switch from...
I do agree with that.
From your SQL server and you go over to Elasticsearch...
If you're putting business logic in your query, then that's where it gets weird.
Yes, and a lot of people do, right? Like, that's part of it. That's almost inherently dumb because you think about, oh, how do I need this data to come back so my application...
We could illustrate this really easily by tying it back into the date, though. You could say, like, hey, select this, and if the date column is null, then let's default the date to this current date, or some date minus 30 years ago or whatever. Right. And if you baked that into your SQL statement inside of your Sprock, where it was determining what the date format should be, because on your, let's say, C# side, you decided to be lazy and didn't want to have to null check anything.
Right.
Now you have some business logic in your stored procedure.
Yeah. And that, I guess my whole point with the business logic thing is, if you do move from SQL Server over to Elasticsearch or some other, type of data storage that's going to be better for whatever that use case is, if you had all that logic baked into SQL Server, now you've got to either duplicate that over in Elasticsearch, or you're going to have to move it down to your code so that it knows how to understand it properly. So either which way, you're going to have a lot more work to do.
That'd be a big regression.
It's going to be a lot more work, right? So that's kind of the other point, is if you put it in your application code, then no matter what your data point is that you're calling, then, so... At any rate, yeah, again, it all depends, but those are some viewpoints on it.
Well, let's talk about something fun for a moment. So, sorry. We talked about what type of development do you prefer? Now,
oh, yeah.
You better not have cheated.
I have not looked at this. I haven't even looked at the emails that have been coming through.
All right, but I hear Joe's awfully quiet, so that means he did. You're too busy playing Overwatch? I hear you, man. Me too. Yeah. Well, you keep saying McCree, but like you said that wasn't your favorite. Yeah, I'm dead. Yeah, I know that I'm dead as soon as I hear it. I'm like, that's too late. I already heard it. All right. So, what type of front end development do you prefer? Front end UI.
Full stack, or no? What type of development do you prefer?
Yeah, what type of development do you prefer? Do you prefer front end UI development? Do you prefer middle tier / server development? Do you prefer back end / database development? Or do you prefer full stack? So, all of the above. And Alan, you were full stack. I think we talked about what our preferences were. So, you were full stack, and Joe was definitely JavaScript. I think I got that right.
Right. You were totally server side, right?
Yeah, Joe was server side.
No, I don't know. I think I said full stack, maybe. I don't
Did
know. No, I must have said server side, else I would have been lying.
Which would you prefer the most? Like, honestly.
Server side.
Oh, yeah, so middle tier type stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you got the 4 choices.
Wait, what was yours?
I don't remember.
No, what is it right now then?
Server side is so much easier to write unit tests for.
Okay.
So if I didn't say that time, I'm going to say it this time.
All right, so you're middle tier back end.
But
type
I don't
stuff.
know. I do a lot of full stack though too. So I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you get bored, but it's so much easier to write unit tests for just the server side.
All right.
So you feel you have more confidence in it. So, all right. So let's see how confident you are with your answer. All right. So which one do you think is the winner out of those 4 choices? Give me a guess.
I'm going to say full stack. Full stack.
Oh, both of you are going the full stack route.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's some confidence. Okay.
We all have ADD. We want to
Do you
bounce
want
around.
to? Do you want to? Okay. So do you want to like break out the tiebreaker? Price is Right style, and you guys give me a percentage as to like how much you think the full stack won.
I'm going to
60.
60%.
Man, that's what I was going to say. All right, 55.
55 from Alan. Okay, so this Price is Right rules. Okay, so if you go over, you automatically lost. If you both go over, you both lost.
$1.
Right? Right. You should have. It's too late. You said 55. All right. So I'll go ahead and tell you this. It was full stack by a lot.
Really?
Yeah, it was server side was the second, but it was pretty decent, ways away from full stack. Full stack had it
By
55.1.
holy smokes.
Yeah, so I think Alan did cheat after all.
I did not.
That previous stuff he was saying about like, oh, I didn't even look at it.
Man, I don't look at this stuff.
Yeah, that was a
Ain't
lie.
Nobody got time for that.
See, there's
Do you
another
think that's
lie.
representative of all developers, or just the people who fill out surveys?
Well, obviously, people filled out the survey.
There were a lot of people who filled this one out, though. I did see emails flowing in a lot.
Yeah.
So there were quite a few responses to this one. I mean, overall, I think most people like to take a break for something, right? Like if you're working on C# all the time, like maybe it's nice to jump into JavaScript or into SQL, or I don't know, man. Like I definitely feel that way.
Yeah.
I don't like waiting on somebody, so I don't want Johnny UI messing my feature up, or somebody else on the back end jogging their feet or getting stuff wrong.
I'm that way too.
Yeah.
I'm totally that way.
But it is nice, though, when you only have to write a server-side component, and you're like, oh, you know what? I can write a unit test to make sure that this is absolutely correct and be done. And then some other jerk will be like, hey, you forgot a use case because here's a bug. And you're like, oh, thanks, guy whose name starts with an A.
Right. Yeah.
I guess I didn't get that one. Even though I had like 99% test coverage.
I was just trying to help you out, man. That's all.
Oh, you thought it was on you? Oh, wow. Well, that's awkward.
Oh man! All right, so who's introducing this next one? I think Joe needs to, because this is like one of his favorite.
Do we not have a topic for the? I'm sorry, but do we not have a survey for the next one though? Nobody wants to come up with a survey.
Oh, do we have a survey?
Favorite Overwatch character?
Oh,
that's all
man.
I care about right now.
That'd be so many choices though. There's like what, 16
21.
characters, 25 characters, something like that.
Oh,
There's
good.
a lot of characters.
No, we can't do that.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, well, I guess we didn't think about that one. So
Okay,
no
how
survey
about,
this time.
I got an idea for a survey. So the lowest percentage, did you say what it was for client side?
In the survey results,
Was it UI?
it was a UI by far. Yeah,
What was the percentage on that?
1.4.
Whoa!
1.4. Okay, so that's tiny. So the question is then, why do we prefer server side? or rather, why don't people like working on UI alone? And so that'll be the survey for next time. We'll have a couple interesting options up there. We want to know why only 1.5% of people picked UI only.
Yeah, I wonder
survey.
I wonder if they're thinking like if everyone was thinking like only CSS, they're like, oh god, I don't want to do
you gotta
CSS
remember,
all day long.
We have people who are not just web developers, right? Like we definitely have some Android people, and
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, I wonder when people read that, like maybe they had like a different, certain interpretation of it. So yeah, you're right. Maybe if they were doing like mobile development, then they're like, well, I have to write the UI component and the, the middle tier part of it myself.
Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, let's put that out there. We'll come up with some interesting options, and we'll see what happens there.
Although there is this one comment that I've had here, like in my little log of things to mention, that kind of goes along with this though. When we were talking about CSS, and that's that, this general thought that like, well, pixels matter, right? Like we joke about like getting a ticket, or no, we've had this joke specifically several times where like you'll go to interview for some company, let's call them company G, and they give you the interview and it is a brutally harsh interview, and then you get through it and you get your new job and they give you the first ticket and it's like, we need the logo moved 5 pixels to the left. And you're like, really? Like, what was that interview about that we just did, right? So, we've definitely had that joke, but placement matters, and we need those people who care about the design, who care about the layout, who care about where the pixels are, right? I mean,
users. That's the users, right?
Maybe we don't want it to be. Maybe we don't have to work on something pixel perfect necessarily, but you definitely want those people on your team that do care about the pixels.
Well, I think that's the biggest problem, right? Like, there's a gap a lot of times from what I've seen, or at least in my experiences. You have the designer. He has this picture in his head, right? And the picture's glamorous. It's beautiful.
Well, I mean, it's a photo. It's PSD, so sure,
right.
It's beautiful.
Right. And then they're like, put this on the web.
Right.
And now
that happens way too often.
And now you're in 10 different browsers on 3 different OSs trying to make this thing work.
Oh, not even browser specific. I mean, at a previous company for an iOS app, I was given a PSD and they're like, here's your requirements for the app. I'm like, a PSD is not a requirement. What are you talking about?
Right. And that's the hard part, right? Like, a lot of times it's not even the designer's job to implement that where it goes. And typically the person, I don't want to say always, but a lot of times the people with the skill sets that can do the CSS and that kind of work, that's not the only thing they do, right? Like, because the thing is companies don't want to be like, hey, what's your skill set? Oh, CSS. What else do you do, right?
Well, I guess part of my point though is like, I didn't want to, because we've made those jokes before in the past, and I thought, well, that's really unfair to like anyone who truly is like just a CSS, uber nerd, right? Then, it's not fair to them because there's some dark CSS magic out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, have you seen some of the? I'm trying to think of an example now where like entire worlds have been created, where it was all CSS driven.
Oh, dude, have you ever been to CSSZengarden.com? If you want to see some magic, man. So this is actually where I learned how to do CSS back in the day. You go to CSSZengarden.com. Essentially, they've got this thing where you can click all designs. It's the same content on the page for every single page. It's the same divs. It's the same spans. It's the same text. Everything you click is different style sheets. So different CSS. And it is amazing what these people have done with this stuff.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, I mean that's cool. That's not the one I was thinking of though.
Yeah, you're talking like animations and stuff. People have made games and stuff in CSS.
Yes, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like,
dude,
but crazy. I can't think of any.
Yeah, you're talking about people that actually work with a canvas and all that kind of stuff. That's hardcore.
I mean, there are some extreme examples out there.
There's Super Mario right here. I'm quote unquote playing
Ooh, CSS Super Mario.
It's not the whole game, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely animations. It's moving around, and it's all in CSS
Is it
and JavaScript.
on CodePen? Is that the one you're looking at? CodePen.io?
Yeah, I'm on it right now.
All right, we'll put a link in that. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of crazy stuff I'm talking about. So, I mean, you definitely want people on your team where those pixels do matter. And it's not necessarily the designers, not necessarily who I'm referring to, Alan. I mean, I know what you're talking about with the designer, but, where there's a level removed there, right? So they create something and they hand it off, and, it's their baby. They created it and they hope that it gets made right. But what I mean, though, is that, someone who's actually in there writing code, because as much as we might dog CSS, I mean, that is some serious code.
Oh, it is.
Oh, I just found Mario Kart.
I did too, dude. I'm on it.
Yeah, I'm playing it right now. I wish you guys were in here with me.
Oh, this is amazing.
Okay, now I'm a little jealous. CSS Super Mario, or Mario Kart, rather.
Yes, Mario Kart. Oh, this is killer. You play as Yoshi.
If I win, then
is this thingsinjars.com?
Yes.
/lab/
This makes me so happy.
CSS cart.
Although,
oh my lord.
Yeah, it's not very fast. That kind of hurts, but
no. And you can just stop. It's very easy to make tight turns.
That's awesome. Anyways, all right, so we digress. Hey, what's our next topic?
Our next topic is going to be Super Mario Kart.
We got
or
lost.
Mario Kart.
We got lost. That's amazing.
Yeah. All right, so what is the next topic?
I wanted to talk about logs.
Yes, let's do that.
Are we doing that or the next ad?
Let's talk about logs.
Let's talk about logs, baby.
Yep. So we talked about this a little bit on the 12-factor app, and it definitely had a very strong opinion on you writing logs to standard out and then managing those logs external to your actual application. That way you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, whether it's database or whether it gets splunked out or whatever. So I did like that aspect, although it does put the onus somewhere else. And so it is kind of nice to have that centralized if you're just doing something small. But, that's not the only option. Most of the time, I think it's stuff's either written to disk or some sort of like Windows event logs or something like that.
Well, I had a conversation recently where somebody was like, "Hey, let's write all the logs to the database." And I was like, "Well, that kind of stinks. What if the error was you lost your database connection, right? Like, what are you going to do now?" So, like, my thing was, I didn't even say standard out, but that's usually more of the Linuxy type world, right? It's so
well, according to 12-factor,
right.
Which is definitely very Linuxy.
Very Linuxy. I mean, extremely Linuxy. But, I mean, my thing would be, wouldn't the file system be the safer? Or if you're using something like a Log4net, you can have it write to multiple streams at the same time. But a queue would probably be even the best thing. I don't know, man. But then that also relies on some sort of connection. So
and your environment. Yeah, I mean, if you have like a couple queues set up for you, then that's fine. But if you have multiple installations or whatnot, then that's not going to work. But yeah, I mean, the database is tempting because it does buy you some stuff for quote unquote free. If you have multiple app servers, you don't have to worry about aggregating those logs. You don't have to deal with any of those headaches that goes along with that. It's all going to be centralized in one spot, and it's easy to query that. But then that's making a lot of assumptions, like you having access to prod databases and stuff like that, which are all big no-nos for big like websites, but might be perfectly reasonable for your company if you're doing something a little bit more specialized and smaller and more isolated. So it's one of those it depends cases again. But I just like writing stuff to disk. So even if I did put it in the database, I like being able to go in there and turn on, or up the level of logging and see all that stuff written to disk and know that it's getting, rolled appropriately and stuff's getting cleaned up. And so I don't have to worry about,
but
disk space
then
or anything.
What about, though, if depending on, like, that's not going to work for everything, though, because then you can start thrashing the disk if you're talking about a system under heavy IO, right?
Yeah, so you got to, hopefully you're using a logging library where you can dial that back by
even if you dialed it back. Let's say you dialed it back.
So you're talking about just a disk that's constantly getting
your Facebook.com,
right?
Your Facebook.com, and you got millions of users hitting you every minute.
Yep.
Okay,
right? You can't log.
That's also
disk.
not one app. I mean, that stuff's getting logged all over the place, different boxes, and you need to have some sort of log aggregator to pull that stuff together. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to make sense of it. I'm sure that's like microservice galore.
But that's kind of an interesting point, though. So, I mean, what you're talking about having, some sort of log aggregator like a Splunk or a Logstash or something
Splunk
like
was
that.
totally what I was thinking of.
But that doesn't take away the problem that you're still writing to a
No,
disk,
it doesn't.
right? Because your disk is still getting thrashed. Splunk is only taking it off everyone's disks and trying to put it into a place.
But doesn't Splunk have an API where you could write directly to it?
Yeah, I mean, you can push stuff. It's got all sorts of options.
Yeah.
It can like read streams, and it
Of
can.
course,
like,
if
batch
network
stuff
is one of your
smartly.
problems, then you're still up the creek.
And that's the problem. I mean, that's why you've always got to consider, like, disk is probably your safest typically, although space is going to be an issue and other things.
Well, what I was thinking of is like you default to the database, and then for those times where you do have the database connectivity issue, then sure, log it to disk if you want, that issue, but you probably have bigger things going on if you can't access the database.
Well,
right? So you're probably already pretty aware that something's down.
It's an
would be my
interesting
guess.
It's an interesting thing, right? Like, I mean, at what point do you have to, like, we talk about decoupled systems and trying to make sure that you have layers and all that. I mean, you have to have some level of confidence in certain things. Otherwise, nothing works, right? Like, if you don't have confidence that your network is working, your app's not going to be able to talk to your SQL or to your database or to whatever, right?
Well, right. Well, that's kind of where I was going, because if you're logging, if you're saying like, well, I can't log to the database because what if the database goes down? Then it's like, well, wouldn't you just be logging something that you already are aware of anyways? The database is down.
Well,
no one ever said, "Oh man, these logs are on disks." No, if anything, it's, "Oh man, there are no logs."
Right.
So I don't care where it ends up as long as there's something I can look at.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, so here that gets into another topic that we won't dive into too deeply here, but that's where alerting is a very important thing that a lot of people think about after the oh crap moment happens, right?
Until your alert goes down.
Right. Jeez. It's like I said.
I mean, I know you say that, but that's definitely,
it can happen. Totally.
Having played around on some, projects on the alerting side.
Yep.
It can be there's different types of alerting that you can do. So you could do polling from whatever the resource is, and then you can do polling from some external source, right? So so if you have, let's say, your database server, and it's sending polls every now and then, like, okay, here's my system health, right? Then if it ever stops, then the other side can say, like, well, I haven't received anything in X number of intervals. Maybe this is a problem. And that's where it can start to, raise the alert. But if it goes down, then you also have this other problem where, like, okay, now it's not sending anything because it's down. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, with systems getting as complicated as they are now, like there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. But I think the three of us can definitely agree that more logs are better, right? Like, it's better to have an overabundance of information than to not have what you need to be able to track down a problem.
Yeah, I've definitely had one problem a lot more often than the other.
Right, and that's frustrating. Now, I will say, though, that brings up another quick thing that everybody should be aware of. If you are logging things and you're logging verbosely, you need to be careful about the kind of information you log. You don't want to be logging social security numbers. You don't want to be logging things like that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, make sure, because it might just be your thing to where you're dumping data that's in some sort of object, and you need to be careful. Like, be aware of that, because that's the kind of thing that could sink your company. It could sink you. It could sink your company. It could sink a lot of things. So, yes, log a lot, but also be aware of what you are logging.
So I think what we've gathered about logs then is it's big, right?
It's huge.
It's heavy.
It's necessary.
Right? It's wood. It's log.
It's better
than bad. It's good. You're welcome.
That makes me so happy. We'll have to have a link in here for that. It is old, man. I blame that on Outlaw. He's been around longer than me.
Whoa. Wait a minute.
Uh,
Things got weird.
I think I saw this on YouTube. It was definitely more recent. Oh, so,
Who did that? Boot camper. Yeah, I see you, pal.
Wasn't sure if you were following along there.
Yeah, no, I got it. Jerk. You know, out of respect, when you were reading your ad, Reed, I didn't even put my cursor anywhere in that block because I didn't want to throw you off.
I believe I heard, hey, you want me to read this?
That was during a take. All right. So, this episode is sponsored by Dev Bootcamp. Think about becoming a software developer? Check out Dev Bootcamp, the original short-term immersive software development program that transforms those new to coding into job-ready, full-stack web developers. Learn front and back-end web development, teamwork, and leadership skills in a rigorous and inclusive environment. Dev Bootcamp has several locations around the country and is accepting applications now. Visit devbootcamp.com/codingblocks to learn more.
Nicely done.
Ready?
Yep. All right, so Imposter Syndrome, and then on to the tips.
Yeah, let me put in a link here. Yep. All right, I got it.
All right.
All right, and we're back in 3. All right. So for our last topic, I wanted to ask the question, do you ever feel like software development is a constant series of being made to feel like an idiot?
Totally.
Yes, all day, most days.
Because I don't know, like so often I'll be asked something and I'm like, well, I don't know how you would do that. Let me think about that for a moment. And then it kind of makes you feel like sometimes you're like, well, I don't think I belong. Like, I feel like maybe I'm not the same as the rest of these guys here.
Well,
And
man,
if I don't come out with a good answer real quick, they're going to see that I'm not up to par with them. They're light years ahead of me.
Oh man, I could be brutal on myself. After working all day, a ticket comes in. I'm like, why have I not learned how to test? After 15 years of doing this, I still can't make sure my stuff even works. Like, what was I thinking? And then, like, that's not even talking about my lack of using design patterns properly or just clean coding. I look at code I wrote 3 weeks ago, and it's terrible. And so it's not even that I feel bad today. I should have felt bad 3 weeks ago when I wrote that crap.
Yeah, man. I'm totally with
nasty.
you. And you know what? So a friend pointed out there's a name for this thing that I had never heard of beforehand called Imposter Syndrome. Had either of you heard of this thing?
yes, only because I listen to business podcasts. And apparently that's like a big, big, big deal in people just even getting off the ground, right? So because it's almost like a form of depression. And, you know, this is the human side of programming. And it's real easy to kind of get down on yourself. And it can really drag you under when you have that in the back of your head. Like, oh my God, this dude's talking about 500 things that I've never even heard of.
I just want to read what Wikipedia has here for this, because after reading this, like, it made me feel a little bit better, and then I was like, yeah, but I'm still not worthy. But it's also known as imposter phenomenon or fraud syndrome. Okay, and it's a term coined in 1978 by a clinical psychologist, or two of them, Dr. Pauline R. Clance and Suzanne A. Imes, referring to high-achieving individuals marked by an inability to internalize their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite external evidence of their competence, those exhibiting the syndrome remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve the success. Yeah, see, I can't even read this. And do not deserve the success they have achieved. Proof of success is dismissed as luck, timing, or as a result of deceiving others into thinking they are more intelligent and competent than they believe themselves to be. Some studies suggest that the imposter syndrome is particularly common among high-achieving women. So, either I'm a woman or I have imposter syndrome. Wait.
Well, what if it really is luck
A high-achieving
and
woman.
chance, and I really don't know what I'm doing?
Well, you know, in all fairness, here's what I'll say to that. And this is the kind of stuff that I have to tell myself from time to time. Is, yes, there is a bit of luck. Yes, there is a bit of timing. But if you hadn't put yourself in the position to be there when that timing occurred or when that luck so happened to happen, then you wouldn't have been in the situation to have even achieved what you did. So it's so easy to get a task or be in a room with somebody, right? Like we all have a mutual friend who for all intents and purposes is a whiz with cloud, right? Like he knows so much about cloud, and to hear him talk about it, sometimes you're like, oh my God, I know nothing about programming, right? Like, and it's almost frustrating to a certain degree because you're like, man, I've been doing this stuff for a long time. Why is it that I have no idea what he's talking about, right? But it's...
Well, that's why I kind of like made the joke about, maybe I'm a woman, because I wonder why. I find it curious that the study suggests that it's particularly common among high-achieving women. Like, why is that a thing? Why is it... Like, okay, everything else that I read up to there before that last sentence, it was like, oh yeah, I totally understand that. That makes sense, right? That seems like something that every one of us could relate to. And then there's that last sentence, and I'm like, whoa, why is that?
It makes me wonder if women in tech have it particularly bad.
I mean,
they do for lots of reasons, but for this one in particular.
This wasn't, to be clear though, this isn't specific to, engineering.
No, it's not.
I mean, this could be any kind of, job.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I hear this all the time in business podcasts. If you listen to Entrepreneur on Fire,
this could be Hillary Clinton could feel imposter syndrome.
I mean, here's the thing though, like,
no, you didn't want to jump on the political bandwagon?
Not at all.
Because it's Outlaw 2016. That's why.
That's right.
Outlaw for 2016.
But I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, the reason why we brought this up is this has been a topic that's come up in Slack quite a few times, and it's come up from people that you can tell they know what they're talking about, right? Like when a conversation comes up that's topical, whether it be C# or JavaScript or some server technology or whatever, and then you'll hear them say something about they have imposter syndrome, like I don't feel like I could do this, or I was asked a question and I was like, well, how in the world do I not know this, right? But I think that's actually a problem with our field. Like, let's think about it from a particular standpoint. Like, if you're a heart surgeon, right, you are going to be extremely knowledgeable on that one thing. And it's not like it changes that much, right? Like, there might be studies that come out that tell you that different types of heart disease can happen or whatever.
There's advancements in procedures, though.
There can be advancements in procedures. But, dude, how much does programming change from month to month, from week?
Oh, that's always been the thing about software development, though, right?
Right.
Like,
it's a constant learning
every 3
curve.
months, there's some new technology or some new library out there.
And I think that's part of the reason why.
Or at least it feels that way.
I think it's got to be so pervasive simply because you feel like you're always behind the curve, right? Like, it is impossible to stay up with all the technologies.
But even aside from the technology part, I have a lot of feelings of the imposter syndrome type stuff about ticketing systems. Like, why haven't I thought this problem out through so much? So it's not even about its code. It's why didn't I foresee these problems in the business logic, or not raising the flag soon enough if there was going to be some sort of problem, or just not realizing that I should have done something ahead of time. And these aren't tech problems. This isn't a problem with me not knowing tech X, Y, and Z. These are me just thinking I'm an incompetent human being because of how I'm interacting at work.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking more like, why is it taking me this long to move the logo 5 pixels?
You know what though? I think part of that though is because, so like with Joe, I think I can sort of speak to yours. Like you like to do things right. Same thing with Outlaw. Like you guys like to do things right, and you have in your mind how long you think it's going to take you to do something like that, right? And I know I'm this way too, to where if you communicate that it's going to take you 3 days, then if that 3 days comes up and you haven't gotten where you need to be, you don't want to back. You don't want to back down, right? And so,
like that's where I feel like I beat myself up about it,
and that's the problem. And here's the thing:
because you'll like work yourself
to death,
to the bone, trying to like meet your deadline, which only sets yourself up for future
problems.
Yeah, because then you're like, the next time you get some deadline, they're like, well, Outlaw did this in 3 days last time, so he could probably do it again. And, this other similar
Well,
task.
that and, you're working at, say, 9 o'clock at night. There's no one around to ask questions on when you run into problems. So you end up having to make these kind of assumptions because you're scrambling to get something done. You get it done at the end of when you said it was going to
You don't ask anyone questions because then that only goes into that only feeds the imposter syndrome. No, man, that's the beauty of Stack Overflow. It's completely, you could just query anonymously and ask your questions there,
and no one has to know.
No one has to know it was you.
Although I will say though, and this is almost a little bit selfish on my part, I almost prefer to work when nobody else is online. I get so much more done.
Oh yeah,
just because of the quiet.
Yeah, I mean, I get so much more done. Like when people are pinging me throughout the day or whatever, it's like I know that I've written 2 lines of code in the past 3 hours, but
Yeah, they say every interruption costs 15 minutes because not only is it the time taking away, but also just trying to get back up to speed to everything that you had in your head and everything that you're doing.
I believe that's accurate. I guess on the imposter thing though, like a lot of times it's the high standards that we've set ourselves up for that we try to achieve, and then when you don't do that, that also puts you back in that rut because you're like, dude, I knew this was going to be 3 days, but here I am on day 3. 16 hours into the day still fighting it, and it's because you want to achieve that, right?
I think, okay, here's a couple of thoughts that came to mind. That as it relates to engineers, maybe it's because we're so binary. You either succeed, you're either a success or you're not. And so when you do run into questions or you have problems, then maybe that's when it's like, well, I guess I'm not the success side because I'm over here, right? Or let's take another example. Maybe let's talk about like, the quote businessman or businesswoman case, right? I'm not like, Uber construction man, businessman, but maybe they think in terms of their success as dollars. And if they have more dollars than person B, then they are more successful than person B, and therefore they can feel like, hey, I'm okay. But then as soon as they get next to person C, then they're like, oh, I'm not making as much money. I'm therefore not as worthy. And, I don't know. Maybe that's it. But I also noticed too, though, some people just seem to be, there's also a difference in personality too, where some people are just more full of themselves. And I don't necessarily mean that as a bad way, like it is so often taken, but their confidence is high just in themselves, period.
Why are you looking at me? I'm totally kidding.
Because I didn't know how to say this earlier.
No, it really, it's a challenging thing. And really, I would be surprised if most people don't feel this to some certain degree, right? Like the first time that you were given MDX, did you not panic a little bit?
Well, but this is why I was questioning that last sentence, though. It's particularly high among high-achieving women. So you just said you imagine that everyone would have this, but yet the studies don't. And that's why I find it curious.
You can't believe everything they say.
Oh, my God. Now, there's some fighting words.
Well, I don't like to hang out with somebody who isn't neurotic. So
well, that's interesting.
That's just part of the deal, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the fact is...
And by the way, that's actually 23 minutes for the average interruption.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yep.
I mean, so here's the thing. It's real, right? Like, you've experienced it. I've experienced it. We've all experienced it. The people in the Slack channel, like, this request to talk about this came up more than once, right? Like, this is not something that's small. So if you feel it, just understand it's natural. It happens. But the way you overcome that is you just, you knock down those barriers. So
keep calm.
Yep, 90% of success is just showing up, right?
I promise
Keep calm, code on.
That is, I swear to you, that is so true, man. I know, look, I know people that have an eighth of the brain power as most everybody that we deal with on any given day, and are incredibly successful because either they were too stubborn or too dumb to give up. Right?
Well, I look at like sometimes when I get stressed out about something like that, and to Joe's point about just showing up, like I often will just tell myself like, okay, there's the path to success, right? And there are these steps that you have to take, 1, 2, 3, whatever they are, however many steps. If you don't take the steps, then you've already automatically failed.
Yeah.
So you just got to keep going and
Yep.
keep iterating on it until you do finish the task at hand. And maybe, but when you're done, you hope that it's success. It's success that you finished it.
But
so
they always say
And
that.
either way, you got to own it.
Yes.
And we've talked about that before. I forget when we had the big conversation about it, but basically, even if you screw up, if it's taking longer, whatever, you need to just kind of buckle down, send whatever emails you got to say, to send, and just kind of keep showing up, keep plugging away, and whatever you do, don't try not to go hide in the bathroom and play Candy Crush.
And do it sooner rather than later, right? Like we did talk about that with the advanced programmer in that series. Is if you know that you are slipping behind, don't wait till the last minute to do it, because that's when imposter syndrome is really going to kick you in the teeth, because you're going to be sitting there working till 3, 4 in the morning trying to get something done. When if you had just let somebody know 2 weeks in advance, like, yo, I keep getting, pulled off or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, not only that, but like your customer, whether that be your boss or, a paying customer, they're going to really appreciate that advance. The sooner you give them that advance notice, as soon as you realize that you're not going to make it, then, they're going to really appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. Hey,
then they're going to say like, oh, he's an imposter. That's why he can't do it. And then you're going to be like, oh gosh, I should crawl back into my shell because I suck.
Dude, this reminds me like, this is going back to my teenage years. But I remember there was some girl that, I really wanted to ask out, and I was so scared, right? Like, it was one of those.
So, of course, you don't. That's what we all did.
Right. And so, you know what probably the best advice, and this goes back to that whole showing up thing, the best advice I ever got, I don't even know who the guy was anymore. I think he was my manager when I was bagging groceries at some store. He was like, dude, what's the worst that's going to happen? She's going to say no?
Yeah.
That's I was like,
there you go.
Oh my God.
She's going to say no and then giggle at you and point at you, and you're going to be like in front of the cafeteria, and then you're going to realize, oh crap, I didn't wear pants today. And then everyone's going to start laughing at you and throwing food at you. It could get really bad, man. I don't know, like, how many girls you've asked out before, but apparently it doesn't sound like it was a lot, because it could get really bad.
I feel like we just deep dived into some dark corner of outlaw's psyche. But dude, totally, like, seriously, after that, I remember thinking, oh wow. And then after that, he said something like, it'll just get easier to say it the next time. Like, if you get rejected once, it hurts really bad. Then you get rejected again and it doesn't hurt. Fortunately for me, I've never been rejected, but you know what I'm saying?
Remember when I was saying some people are just more full of themselves? And you were like, hey man, why are you looking at me?
Sometimes there really is an imposter in your midst.
Oh man. But no, seriously, like, it's that same type thing.
I feel like you're an imposter acting as an imposter. Like, you're really not an imposter. Like, you ever think that?
This is like, what's that movie?
Inception,
yes, that's where we've just gone.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, seriously though, it's that whole thing. Like, if you just keep going forward, success will follow, as long as you are doing things and you're always trying to improve. Like, that imposter's always going to be there, but it's that work ethic that will really get you through it.
So I think the takeaway here is, if I take Alan's story here and I apply it to the code here, if I keep asking the code out, eventually it's going to work out. It's going to get done.
Yeah,
it will blossom.
Well, what I heard here is that you probably feel miserable now, unless you're a new programmer, in which case you still have to get there.
Oh, you haven't been broken down enough if you're a new programmer.
No, and then you're gonna break down and you're gonna stay there for most of your career. Well, welcome to programming.
Welcome aboard. Now come join us on Slack so that we can all grovel and drink away our
Yep.
sorrows.
We will help
and
you
chat.
with your pity.
Yes. Oh, man.
Yep, and we take a shot every time someone starts a sentence with "my manager." ...
Oh, man. That's amazing.
All right. So in the resources we like section, we're going to have lots of self-help books.
Chicken soup for the soul. That'll be number one.
Chicken soup for the software
Love it.
developer.
We'll have affiliate links to whiskey.
Oh,
This
man.
episode is sponsored by Maker's Mark.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing.
No, it's really not sponsored by them. They'd be nice.
Yeah, it would be good. Resources we like. So last episode, I bought a book on air and was asked a couple times which one it was. And the name is Design Patterns. That's pretty common. But if you go to sourcemaking.com, they've actually got a lot of really cool stuff written about. And you can actually read most, if not all, of the book online, actually, for free. So you should go to that website. And I wish I had read a little bit better before last episode, because their examples are actually really good, which is really hard to find for most design patterns. So definitely wanted to mention that one. We'll have a link in the show notes, which are at www.codingblocks.net/episode 43.
We've got a few other ones. I'm just adding them randomly. So we have CSS Zen Garden.
Oh, I
We
had
put that-
those in the notes. Okay, yeah.
Oh yeah. Also the Mario Kart thing, so that you can waste some time playing Mario Brothers in CSS. That's amazing. And then that's pretty much it. So now on to the tips of the week. So one of the things we've talked about this tool a lot in the past, and I just really have
Resharper.
no, not
This is a
Resharper.
resharper one.
I'm debating re-upping my subscription for the all toolkit.
Sorry.
I'm considering it, but WebStorm. So I'm getting to where I really dig this thing. Other than it being a complete memory hog, I really like the IDE. One of the things that I just found recently that I love even more about it, have either of you ever dealt with JSDoc? It's kind of like comments, like your C#. If you do the triple slash, it'll open.
summary document.
Yeah,
The summary documentation.
it's similar to that. So JS docs is very similar to that. So like if you do a /*, then it will automatically kick in JS docs. So like if you're above a method where you've already kind of filled out the method, it'll go in and fill in the parameters and all that kind of stuff, which I've always known about and I like a lot. But one of the things that I found that was really sweet is it'll do deep linking. So I'm a fan of, in my JavaScript, I don't like, and even in C#, right? Like if I get past like 3 or 4 parameters, then I'm getting ready to start putting in like a request object or some sort of config object that you pass into a method, because I don't like long signatures. They drive me crazy. So you can do the same thing in JavaScript, and a lot of frameworks will do that where you pass in some sort of config object, right? If in that JS doc above it, you do, like let's say that you called the parameter config, you can do config dot, give it a type. And then when you go to use that thing in your code and you do config dot, it will actually know based off the JS doc, the various different nested parameters that are there. So it will deep link the JS documents, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. So that's my tip. So /** and WebStorm above some sort of JavaScript thing, it'll bring up the JS docs, and then you can do deep linking. And I'll try and get a sample up so that you guys can see what I'm talking about.
Very cool. All right, so mine is the output clause. Joe, do you ever use that? Do you know what I'm talking about? I know Alan does. That's why
not
I'm
sure. Output clause.
All right, so
Oh, I do. Actually, I was recently had a demo of this, and it's awesome.
yeah, this is a very
I'm using
cool
it,
SQL Server T-SQL feature where if you're not already using it, let's say you want to insert some records in a table, but then you're like, what did I just insert? Specifically, if that table has a primary key, so you can't create the primary key, you need it to be created for you, and the SQL server tell you, or the database server tell you what the key is, right? And assuming it's an identity column, right? So you insert that record in there. Now you want to know what you just inserted so that you can have the key back. Well, you could do something like an insert into table, and then in parentheses, whatever your columns are, and then output inserted dot star, and then have a values statement with whatever you want to do. So let's say you had 2 columns and 2 values you're going to do. So you'd say insert into table, parentheses, column 1, comma, column 2, in parentheses, output inserted dot star, values, open parentheses, 1, comma 2, in parentheses, because we're only inserting those 2 numbers into the 2 columns. And what gets returned back is the same as a select statement that would have those 2 columns with those 2 values coming back to you. So you can see what was inserted. So it's a very cool way of, especially when you have like an identity column that where the database server is going to create that key for you, you can get back what the value was, right? And I said inserted dot star, but you could say inserted dot and then whatever column or columns you wanted back, right? And this is cool too because you could work on it, like for example, in a delete statement. So you could say delete from this table where blah blah blah, but output deleted dot star, and then that way it returns back. So maybe you want to put it, you want to do something else with that value. Maybe you want to put it into some kind of history table or whatever. Or if you wanted to have use this output statement as part of a what am I trying to say here?
Like a return?
Well, no, I was thinking of an example of like a change log kind of scenario, right?
Oh, yeah, like a log table.
So going back to Alan's order statuses, where he wants to know when the date was valid.
Order statuses.
Oh yeah, my order statuses. Then you could have your update statement return the updated .star so that you would know what was just updated, so that if you wanted to insert that into another table for like logging kind of historical information, then you could. And so it's going to change. If it's being deleted, then it's going to be deleted .star. If it's inserted, it's going to be inserted .star. I think I said updated .star, but I think that's wrong, right? It's just inserted and deleted, if I remember right. Yeah. So.
Oh, no update?
Well, no update. The data that changed, the old data is deleted, and the new data that you overwrote it with is inserted.
Okay.
So we'll have a link to that in the show notes, but it's a very cool thing that if you're not already using, then maybe it can be a way for you to use it. It could definitely, if you were previously doing something like, hey, let me insert this into this record or into this table, and then let me select it back out so that I can return it back to the user, right? Well, now you can do those 2 operations in one statement and be done.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I've definitely done that, and I've also done nasty stuff where like I insert to like a temp table first, and then do my stuff, and then use that temp table to make other decisions later on because I destroy the data that I need. And so yeah, this is a much better way of doing it.
It's not a terrible practice, depending on what you're doing with the temp table.
In very rare circumstances, maybe you turn the identity off, make your own up, and then turn it back on, and then that way
I try never to do that.
There's cases.
I feel like I'm breaking the laws of databases if I turn identity insert off. It's like changing gravity.
You wouldn't want to do it in code, but I'm trying to think of like some examples where like in maybe like some initialization type.
You totally do that.
Yeah, like merge into scenarios where you want the IDs to be very specific values.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, that's a good topic for one day. Do we go by IDs or by values?
Oh man. But
yeah, we don't want to go there. It's too late. I got video games to play. Add it to the list. So I guess we're up to me. I actually just found this on Hacker News. There is a GitHub, or there's a project here. This could be like a Chrome plugin that lets you go to definition in GitHub the same way you would like a static language.
Ooh.
So you install this Chrome plugin, and now when you're looking at a GitHub project, you can right-click on like a variable or a function name rather, and it will zip you over to the file and let you see that. And so what I do now a lot of times, if I'm just trying to look through a project to figure out how something works, like an open source project I'm using, I'll download this source and then open up in Visual Studio just so I can navigate around it easier than trying to browse through those files and kind of Control F. And so this looks like a great way of browsing repos without having to go through those extra steps. So if you find yourself on GitHub often, this might be something to check out.
Dude, that's pretty sick.
Yeah, it's slick, huh? And it looks like it works really well. I've added it. I haven't used it much, though. I've just kind of done a couple samples.
Huh. That's nifty.
Yeah, and I haven't seen if it's if there's any languages it's limited to or not. I just was looking at a JavaScript project, and it worked great for that.
Awesome.
I mean, as well as anything works for JavaScript projects.
Huh. Is it only... But it only works for GitHub pull requests.
Only for GitHub, yep.
Yeah.
It's a Chrome plugin for GitHub.
Right. Huh. Very cool. All right. Well, that brings this show to an end. So with that, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app. And be sure to give us a review on iTunes and Stitcher if you haven't already. We would greatly appreciate it.
And contact us with any questions or topics, and visit us at codingblocks.net, where you can find all our show notes, examples, discussions, and more.
And visit us at... I did it again, and I've done this several times. Send us your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net, and make sure to follow us on Twitter or join us in Slack and chat me up.
And you can join us on Slack by going to www.codingblocks.net/Slack. So that'd be it. What is this, episode 43?
Yep.
That is a wrap.